Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. I never thought I'd be the type to post something like this, but honestly, I'm still reeling. Not just from what happened, but from how normal everyone acted while it was happening, like it was just another Tuesday, not a complete and total betrayal. I'm 34, divorced, and I've got two kids, Ella, 9, and Max, 7. Their dad and I split 4 years ago, and since then, it's just been the three of us. We've built this quiet little rhythm together, and while it's not always easy, it's ours. Money's tight more often than not, but I make it work. I work a lot, save when I can, and say no to most things that aren't essential. Vacations? Never really an option. This is why, after 2 years of setting money aside little by little, I decided I was going to surprise the kids with something big, a cruise. Not just any cruise. One with water slides, kids' clubs, family suites, the works. It was the first real vacation I'd ever planned for us. I kept it a secret for months. Booked the trip. Got their passports in order. Made arrangements at work to take time off. I even made a little countdown calendar, hidden in a drawer, waiting for the right moment to give it to them. I was going to tell them 3 days before we left. I imagined their faces lighting up when I pulled out their packed suitcases and told them we were flying to Miami and boarding a ship. I wanted that moment so badly. I needed it. I needed a win for me, for them, for the version of us that had weathered so much already. But then came her. My stepmother, Carrie. Let me say up front, she's not evil. She's not the Disney villain version of a stepmom. She's just invasive, boundaryless. And somehow, no one ever seems to mind. She married my dad a few years after my mom passed. We were never close, but I tolerated her for his sake. He loves her genuinely, and she makes him happy, which I can respect. But from the beginning, she had this way of inserting herself into things that had nothing to do with her. She'd make passive comments about my parenting, suggest little improvements for how I keep my house, show up with clothes for the kids I never asked for, always with this weird tone, like she was rescuing them from my poor taste. I learned to pick my battles. A lot of eye rolls. A lot of biting my tongue. But this wasn't something I could roll my eyes at. 3 days before the cruise, the day I was going to surprise the kids, I got a call from my dad. I remember it vividly. I was in the car, picking up dry cleaning, mentally rehearsing how I'd present the surprise that night. He sounded upbeat and casual. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks for thinking of Carrie and the girls. They're so excited about the cruise. The world just stopped for a second. Sorry, I asked, trying to keep my voice from cracking. He laughed like I was being silly. The cruise. You know, letting them come. It means a lot. You didn't have to invite them, but Carrie said you offered. And that's when it clicked. She'd found out. And she told them she was coming. Not only that, she had told them it was my idea. I sat in that parking lot with my dad still on the phone, barely processing what he'd just said. I must have sounded like I'd been hit with a stun gun, because my brain just stopped. He kept talking, something about needing to pick up a few swimsuits for Carrie's daughters, and how they were already picking out their favorite excursions. Meanwhile, I was staring out the windshield, trying to remember when exactly my private vacation became a group event I never invited anyone to. I cut him off mid-sentence. Dad, I never invited her. Silence. Just enough of a pause for me to picture the look on his face. That blink slowly and pretend you misheard kind of confusion. What do you mean? Carrie said you wanted to make it a family thing. She said you thought it'd be good for the kids to bond. And there it was. Not only had she inserted herself and her kids into my vacation, she positioned it as a kind-hearted gesture from me. A sweet, selfless invitation. One that never happened. I told him, again, calmly but firmly, that she was never invited. That I had planned this cruise for my kids. That I'd been saving for 2 years. That this was supposed to be a surprise for Ella and Max, something just for us. He didn't respond at first. Just a long silence followed by a hesitant, oh, not angry, not apologetic. Just awkward. And I knew what that meant. He wasn't going to confront her. He was going to stay neutral, which, in our family, has always meant siding with the person making the most noise. That night, I didn't sleep. Not just because I was furious, but because I was still trying to figure out how she found out. I hadn't told anyone besides my boss and a close friend. The kids didn't know. My dad hadn't known. Then it hit me. 2 weeks earlier, Carrie had dropped by unannounced and said she was in the neighborhood. She stayed about 20 minutes, just long enough to make an awkward conversation and poke around. At one point, she helped herself to the kitchen for a glass of water. My laptop was open on the table. I had the booking page up. Cruise itinerary, reservation confirmation, port details, right there in plain sight. She must have seen it. Maybe even take a photo of the screen. And then, this is what gets me, she made up an entire narrative. She decided she was going, told my dad, told her daughters, and by the time I got wind of it, it was already a done deal. I texted her. No call. Just a direct, clear message. Hey, I need to be extremely clear. You and your daughters were not invited on this cruise. I don't know how you got the idea that you were. This is something I planned for Ella, Max, and me. Please respect that. She responded in under a minute. Well, I just assumed since it was a family trip and we're family now. Didn't mean to step on your toes. Just trying to give the girls something to look forward to. There was no apology. No acknowledgement that she overstepped. Just this guilt-trippy, faux-innocent tone, like I was being unreasonable for setting a boundary she had no business crossing in the first place. And the worst part? I could already feel the fallout starting. Because I wasn't just dealing with her. I was dealing with my dad's refusal to deal with her. The next morning, I got a text from my dad. It was one of those messages you can tell was rewritten 3 times before hitting send. Hey, I know this got miscommunicated somewhere. I'm sure Carrie didn't mean to overstep. Let's just all talk and figure something out. There it was. The classic neutral territory approach. Let's all talk. Let's all figure it out. As if this was a shared mistake. As if I had any part in turning my vacation into Carrie's family outing. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to cool down and think clearly, because if I answered in the moment, it wouldn't have been with words anyone could print out. Meanwhile, the kids were still totally in the dark. I had their little countdown envelopes hidden in my room, each with a clue inside leading to the surprise. I had this vision of them jumping on the bed, screaming with excitement when they found out we were going on a cruise. It was one of those things I'd held onto during the harder months, this mental image of finally giving them something big, something unforgettable. And now I had to decide whether I was still going to give that moment to them, knowing it might all be overshadowed by someone else's chaos. Later that day, Carrie texted again. Not a long message, just this. So should we coordinate transport to the port together? I stared at it for a full minute, wondering how someone could be that brazen. Like everything I'd said the night before didn't happen. Like she didn't just completely bulldoze a trip that was never meant to include her. No apology. No reflection. Just a logistics question, like I was her travel agent. I didn't answer. I forwarded the message to my dad. Still think this is a miscommunication? His reply was slower this time. I'll talk to her. That's all he said. Not, you're right. Not, this isn't okay. Not even, I'm sorry. Just I'll talk to her, which roughly translates to, I'll say something vague and non-committal that makes her feel better without actually holding her accountable. It was becoming clear that if I wanted this boundary to stick, I'd have to enforce it alone. That night, I pulled out the surprise envelopes and stared at them. I could still give my kids this moment. I could still surprise them and go. But if I didn't say something stronger, louder, firmer, Carrie might show up at the port. And I wasn't about to spend thousands of dollars just to be stuck on a ship with someone who had stomped all over my plans and then smiled like she was doing me a favor. So I made a choice. I wrote one last message. Let me say this again, as clearly as I can. You are not coming on this cruise. Your daughters are not coming. I never invited you. I planned this for my kids and me. You saw something that wasn't yours, inserted yourself without permission, and then lied to my father about it. If you show up at the port, I will treat it as harassment and notify security. That was the first time I'd ever used language that strong with her. It felt terrifying. And also, incredibly freeing. She didn't reply. But my dad did. This time with a little more edge. I don't think that was necessary. You're being very hostile. I didn't even answer. Because if he thought that was hostile, he hadn't been paying attention to the years of quiet swallowing I'd done just to keep the peace. I was done keeping the peace. They weren't even supposed to be involved in the first place. The next day, I finally told the kids. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed the reminder that this trip was about them. Not Carrie. Not my dad. Just Ella, Max, and me. I brought out the envelopes during breakfast. Each one had a little riddle, a tiny drawing, a surprise that led to the next. The last envelope had a photo of a cruise ship and 2 matching sun hats I'd ordered online weeks earlier. Ella squealed so loudly that she knocked over her juice. Max froze for a second, wide-eyed. and then immediately asked if he could go down the water slides before lunch every day. It was everything I hoped for. Pure joy. I took pictures. I recorded a video of Max jumping up and down in his pajamas, clutching his toy shark, and yelling, "We're going on a boat," as he'd just won the lottery. And in that moment, I felt like I could breathe again. Like, maybe, if I held firm, I could still get the trip I'd dreamed of for us, even if the lead-up had turned into something I'd never imagined. That high didn't last long. Carrie broke her silence 2 days before departure. Not with an apology. Not with a final push to be included. She sent me an email. A long, passive-aggressive, multi-paragraph email that reads like a carefully curated PR statement. You know the kind. Lots of, "I'm sorry you felt hurt," language, vague justifications, subtle digs. She said she was deeply disappointed by the tone I'd taken, that I misinterpreted her enthusiasm as an entitlement, that she had only ever wanted to be part of a blended family that supported one another. She signed it. "I hope we can heal from this." No acknowledgement of the lie. No ownership of inserting herself. Just a manipulative twist on the story that painted me as cold, hostile, and unwilling to share joy with my extended family. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted it and sent it to my friend, the same one who had known about the cruise planning from the beginning. Her response? "That's Olympic-level gaslighting." And she was right. It's not that Carrie didn't know what she'd done. She just didn't think I'd have the guts to call her out on it. And now that I had, she was scrambling to control the narrative. She couldn't stand the idea that I had drawn a line and wasn't backing down. But the real kicker came the night before the cruise. My dad showed up at my apartment, unannounced. He knocked on the door around 8:30 p.m. I was packing toiletries and checking the kids' passports one last time. Ella answered. "Grandpa." He smiled and hugged her, and then looked up at me with that familiar half-disappointed, half-pleading expression I knew too well. "I just wanted to talk. 5 minutes." I should have said no, but I nodded and let him in. The kids ran off to play, and we stood there in the kitchen, him fiddling with his hands, me leaning against the counter, arms crossed. He opened with, "This has gotten out of hand." No greeting. No asking how I was doing. No, "Hey, sorry my wife hijacked your vacation." Just an opening statement that implied I had escalated things. I let him talk. I let him say everything he'd come to say, that he wished I'd handled it more gracefully, that Carrie had been hurt, that family doesn't shut each other out over one misunderstanding. Then he dropped the line that finally snapped something in me. "You know, Carrie's just trying to be part of your life." I said, then maybe she should have started by not lying about being invited. He didn't know how to respond to that. He fumbled, said something about her heart being in the right place. And that was it. I couldn't take another word. I told him, calmly but clearly, that this wasn't about her heart or her intentions. It was about actions. And her actions had shown zero respect for me, my kids, or the effort I had put into planning something for our little family. I told him I wasn't changing my plans. We were leaving in the morning, and if she showed up, I'd do exactly what I said in my message. Contact security, no hesitation. He left with a sigh and a quiet, "I hope this doesn't become permanent." And as I closed the door behind him, I realized that it already had. Because sometimes a single act draws a line that can't be erased. The morning of the cruise felt like a reset button I didn't know I needed. We got up before the sun, had bagels in the car on the way to the airport, and the kids buzzed with excitement the entire flight. Ella kept asking if there'd be real dolphins outside the ship windows, and Max was convinced we'd be able to see the bottom of the ocean if we looked hard enough. It felt real again, like all the noise from the past week, the texts, the manipulation, the awkward visit from my dad, was finally behind us. Just me and my kids, heading towards something I had built for them. Boarding the ship was a process, but a smooth one. The second we stepped onto the deck, Max grabbed my hand and pointed up at the slides twisting above the pool. "That is what I'm doing first thing tomorrow," he shouted. Ella was quieter, but her eyes were huge. She clutched her little journal like she was documenting every second. I'd given her a small Polaroid camera, and she was already filling it with blurry shots of the lobby chandelier and the glass elevators. We got to the room, and the look on their faces when they saw the bunk beds. Worth every penny. This was ours. Every part of it. I didn't post much on social media, didn't feel the need. But I did send a couple of photos to close friends. Just snapshots. proof that we made it. Proof that the storm hadn't swallowed us whole. We spent the first evening eating ice cream for dinner and watching the ocean roll by from the balcony. The kids were asleep by 8:30, worn out from the excitement. And I sat on the balcony alone for a long time, just breathing. I hadn't realized how much I've been holding in. Not just the Carrie drama, but everything. The mental load of parenting, the financial stress, the years of quietly taking hits so others didn't feel uncomfortable. I'd never really claimed anything just for myself and my kids. Not until now. And sitting there with my legs propped up, listening to the ocean hum against the side of the ship, I felt something that had been missing for a long time. Control. Not over everything, not in the way life ever allows, but over this, over my story. But of course, the silence couldn't last forever. Day 3, mid-morning. We were by the pool. Max was building a lopsided sandcastle in the ship's little beach area. Ella was painting her nails with some cruise kit spocket. And I was lounging with a book, wearing sunglasses, utterly relaxed, until I saw the notification. One of those you don't follow this person but your mutuals liked it posts. Carrie. On Instagram. A photo of a dock. Ocean behind her. Some generic cruise port. She was wearing a sun hat and those massive sunglasses that take up half your face. The caption? Not the trip we planned, but still finding the joy. No location tag. No cruise line was mentioned. But still, it sent a jolt through my chest. Could she be here? Was she unhinged enough to book the same itinerary? I scrolled through the rest of her feed. No other posts. Nothing conclusive. But it was enough to set my brain on high alert. I spent the next few hours glancing over my shoulder more than I care to admit. At dinner, I scanned the dining room before walking in. Not because I thought she'd confront me, but because if she was actually on the same ship, that meant she'd seen all my boundaries, all my warnings, and ignored them anyway. It would mean she was willing to force proximity just to stay in control. And the thought of that? Of her showing up at the kids' club, or near our room, or just floating in the background like some kind of ghost haunting the vacation. It made my stomach twist. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway outside our cabin made me tense. Every time the elevator chimed down the corridor, I imagined Carrie standing there, waiting. Was it irrational? Probably. Was it based on her track record of overstepping every possible line? Not even slightly. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to salvage the day. The kids had been begging to try the mini golf course on Deck 9, and I promised myself I wouldn't let paranoia suck all the joy out of their vacation. But then, around mid-morning, I got a text from my dad. No context. No greeting. Just. She told me she wasn't on the same cruise. She booked something else last minute. Can we move on from this now? It hit me like static. So she wasn't here. I exhaled. Hard. Like my lungs had been locked up since the second I saw her Instagram post. It still felt weird. Her photo could have been taken anywhere. It was vague enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to confirm anything. That ambiguity felt intentional. Like she wanted me to be unsettled. Like she knew just how close she'd come to ruining something and couldn't resist twisting the knife with one last jab. But despite all that, the rest of the trip? It was incredible. Ella and Max had the time of their lives. They swam every day, ate their weight in soft serve, and made a dozen little friends in the kids' club. One night, we watched an outdoor movie together under the stars, Max curled up in my lap, Ella resting her head on my shoulder. The ocean stretched out in front of us like it went on forever. And in that moment, I realized something. Carrie didn't win. She tried to hijack something that wasn't hers, and when I stood up to her, she twisted the story, painted herself as the victim, and leaned into guilt and manipulation. But in the end, she stayed home. And I didn't. That's a win. By the time we flew home, I felt lighter, clearer. I had proof now, proof that when I set a hard boundary and enforced it, the world didn't end. No one disowned me. My kids didn't suffer. In fact, they thrived. When I stopped doing damage control for other people's egos, I made space for something better, for peace, for joy, for us. Of course, re-entry wasn't totally smooth. The day after we got home, I opened Facebook and saw that Carrie had posted a status. Some people will never understand what it means to be a real family. Grateful for those who do. She didn't tag me, but she didn't have to. It was just enough to provoke. Just enough to remind me she hadn't forgotten. I showed it to my friend again. She rolled her eyes. It's giving desperate. She was right. I didn't respond. I didn't message her. I didn't call my dad. I didn't do anything. Because I'd already done the one thing that mattered. I had drawn the line. And from where I stood, it was holding. It's been a few weeks since we got back. The kids are still talking about the cruise like it was the greatest adventure of their lives. Max drew a picture of our cabin in his notebook, complete with a water slide that wrapped around the whole ship. Ella keeps her little photo album on her nightstand, and now and then, she'll flip through it before bed and smile to herself. That alone makes everything worth it. Not just the money, not just the planning, but the boundary. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't just hope someone would respect my space, I protected it. And yeah, it created some waves. My dad hasn't spoken to me since the trip. We've exchanged a few texts, mostly short and awkward. There's a distance there now, the kind that isn't about logistics or disagreements, but something deeper, disappointment. Not mine. His. He's disappointed that I didn't bend, that I didn't smooth things over, that I made it clear his wife wasn't entitled to the space I carved out for my kids and me. But honestly, that's not mine to fix. He chose to marry someone who doesn't respect boundaries. I chose to raise my kids in an environment where they do. And I'm okay with those choices sitting side by side. I used to think family was this sacred thing you had to preserve at all costs. That saying no, even once, meant you were cold, ungrateful, dramatic. But I'm learning that family isn't sacred if it runs on guilt. Family isn't unconditional when the conditions are. Don't make us uncomfortable. Don't disrupt the narrative. Don't ever say, this far, no further. That's not love. That's control. And I'm done confusing the two. Carrie's still doing her thing. Still making veiled posts, still trying to play the misunderstood stepmother. But here's the thing: she lost access. To me. To the kids. To the version of the story where she always comes out looking generous and well-meaning. She can spin it however she wants. But I know the truth. And more importantly, my kids know it too. They know I stood up for something that mattered. They know this trip was for them. They know that I made it happen, even when it got messy. One night, not long after we got back, Ella crawled into my bed and whispered, "That was the best week of my life." She didn't know anything about the behind-the-scenes drama. She didn't need to. All she saw was the joy. And that's all I wanted. So yeah, I planned a cruise. Someone tried to hijack it. I said no. They didn't like that. But I held my ground. And we still got our perfect week. They'll remember the trip. But I'll remember what it taught me. That it's okay to draw the line. And it's okay when people don't like where you draw it. Because peace is expensive. But it's worth every single penny.